Hello and welcome to History Happy Hour. We're here for episode 3. History Happy Hour brought to you by Lehigh Valley Passport to History. I am your host, George Wacker of Lehigh Valley with Love Media, and we're here today for another look at history that makes the Lehigh Valley so special. Today we're going to be talking about something really interesting, and I've seen the presentation already. You guys are in for a treat. We're talking about early Pennsylvania Dutch therapies for pandemics and other diseases with Dr. Ned Handel of the Williams Township Historical Society. Again, I've seen the presentation, and you guys are in luck. But first things first, we want to talk about why we're here. History Happy Hour is brought to you by Lehigh Valley Passport to History. It's a partnership of 28 and growing historic sites and resources in and around Pennsylvania's Lehigh and Northampton counties. The group aims to connect you with historical sites to see and things to do throughout our region. History Happy Hour is a series designed to bring Lehigh Valley history wherever you watch these things, along with a recommended drink from a local brewery or a distillery partner, which we're going to get into in a second. If you would like more information about upcoming events, or if you're in an organization that would like to join the group, visit Passport to History's website at www.lehighvalleyhistory.org. I'm going to bring it up here. And be sure to join Passport to History Weekend. It's on Saturday, August 15th and Sunday, August 16th for free admission, tours, activities, and at participating sites. Again, you can find that all at their website, which is really nice. And we want to talk too about our drink sponsor tonight, which I'm excited about. I have a bottle with me. Social Still. This week's drink sponsor is Social Still. They produce high-quality spirits on site. If you haven't been to their South Bethlehem location, you should. They produce bourbon, vodka, gin, rum, and rye. The distillery is also home to a restaurant, bar, and a tasting room. Stop by for an amazing meal. I mean, look at that. That's great. The best cocktails, a tour. This is the place that I learned what an angel share was. If you don't know what that is, you should Google it. It was a really interesting thing. The recommended drink tonight, though, and I think Ned is going to talk about this a little bit, is based on an actual cure. I don't know much about this, but apparently bourbon with a bite of onion, raw or warm, depending on what, I guess, is ailing you, is something that they used to do. So tonight's recommended bourbon is Tomboy Straight Bourbon from Social Still. It's handcrafted from Pennsylvania corn, rye, and malted barley. It's a straight bourbon that's aged at least 2 years in American charred oak. It's inspired by the fearless spirit of exploration. Tomboy's pays tribute to the mining history of the American West. And if it's anything like their Sasquatch, I'm really excited to try it. So please be sure to visit Social Still or patronize them. Now, we're going to get to this presentation. So, Ned, we are on the first. We're on the first slide here. Can you take us to our second slide about a parade of pandemics? I am honored to be able to bring this in. I want to talk a little bit to set the stage before Ned starts talking. There are a lot of pandemics that have affected the world. Clearly, these are not just American pandemics, and it's to really show you. If you look here at the bottom, COVID-19 in 2019 it is so recent. If you look back at the bubonic plague, cholera, measles, and the flu, we want to think about how did these people in these times deal with it? They didn't have the medicines of today. So, Ned, if you could go to the next slide. About what could you do before modern medicine? Before remdesivir, before dexamethasone, I think I got that right, before chloroquine, which is in the news, before accurate diagnosis, and especially before vaccines, what did people do to combat pandemics? And so, Ned, now is the time where I'm going to bring you on to start your presentation. You're going to take it from here. Ned is a retired professor of medicinal chemistry from Lehigh University and a published author on local folk medicine practices. I'm really excited to see him do this. So thank you, Ned, and take it away from here.
Thank you, George. I want you all to meet your instructor. He's the chap there on the left. I've spent 5 decades at Lehigh University teaching medicinal chemistry and pharmacology, which is basically how one designs and makes the drugs of the present era. 5 drug projects that I've worked on have gotten into the clinic, and 2 of them have made it to market, which is not that bad a record for 5 decades in medicinal chemistry. But I'm semi-retired now out here in Williams Township, south of Easton, living on Hexenkoff Rock. There's Hexenkoff Rock to the right. It's shaped like the head of a witch. It takes a little imagination. But the local folk have known about Hexenkoff and the witches for well over 2 centuries. It seems that the witches gather here at least twice a year to dance on the rock. Once is the 30th of April, which is Sabbath day. It's the night before the devil's birthday. The other time they come back is at Halloween. But they do pass through every now and then, and some of them stop and talk to me. They've taught me a lot about witchcraft, about healing, and about hexing. How do you remove evil? How do you dispense evil? So let me show you something about what I've learned from the witches of Williams Township. First of all, witches get a bad rap. There are many diseases that are blamed on witches. It was believed that a witch flying by and inflicted Job with all the boils and pox as God tempted him in the Bible. There's a German disease called the Hexenschuss, which means the witch's strike. It's a pain in the lower back. And in the olden times, pains in the lower back were believed to have been caused by being bumped by witches. There's also a childhood disease, a rash on the face of children, in which the disease bears the same name as the cure. The cure is the spores of a fern, like a podium powder, if you will. Stripped from the fern and ground fine, spread on the skin. This can alleviate this rash condition. So it's Hexenmühl, or witch's flower, and it's the disease, and it's the cure. Now, we know diseases are caused by bad witches and demons. The Bible tells us at several points that Jesus drew demons out of sick individuals, and in the drawing out of the demon, the person was cured. I want you to remember, though, that there are good witches. Remember the the Wizard of Oz? There was the Galenda, the Good Witch of the North. She helped Dorothy and her friends. In the Bible, in the book of 1 Samuel, the Witch of Endor actually helps King Saul predict the outcome of a coming battle. So you can have good witches and bad witches. It's the bad ones you got to worry about. Now, as I said, we're out here on the Witches Superhighway, leading from Easton to Hexenkopf Rock. Hexenkopf would mean witch's head, but some of the old timers translate it as witch's headquarters because they know that the witches come here at least twice a year. When they pass through, some of the good ones stop and talk to me. A few years ago, I met this one, and she told me about being a Hexenmeister. A Hexenmeister means a master of hexes. And Hexenmeisters can do a lot of good. They can cast out other hexes and curses placed on sick individuals by bad witches. They can also transfer illness to some inanimate place. They're just as I had my stack of textbooks when I was teaching pharmacology and medicinal chemistry, so the Pennsylvania Dutchman's got his or her textbooks, and these are 3 of the most common that you see there. The one on the right actually begins in Northampton County. The author of The Long Lost Friend lived in Hellertown in 1804 and 1805 and began the writing of this book, which was eventually published in Reading in 1820. But within the covers of these books, all of which you can still buy, just Google their names, they're available online. In fact, the one on the far right is free. It's considered one of the sacred texts of humanity. And at a website called The Sacred Text, you'll find the complete edition of Der lange verborgene Freund, or the long lost friend. So pick up the book, learn about it, and you can become a practitioner. Practitioners are called powwow doctors. They're called hexenmeisters. And they're sometimes called browsers. All of these are names for the Pennsylvania folk doctor engaged in curing and in transferring hexes. Now, the witch told me a secret. She told me that I could be more powerful and I could channel some of those old powwow doctors of the past if I simply did one ceremony. I had to take my pitchfork and go out into my barnyard and stand on either manure or a piece of dried dog turd. Hold your pitchfork up in the air and swing it around. It's a little better if you do this at midnight on the darkest of possible nights, but it'll still work at daylight. You temporarily invoke the devil. The devil will come down when you speak these magic words. Here I stand on my rotted shit, for Hexenmeister make me fit. And kaboom, you're now channeling a powwow doctor of 2 centuries ago. And I'm channeling Dr. Peter Saylor, a powwow doctor from Robsville who died in 1803. A very powerful cure.
So, Ned, so you stand on dog poop and summon the devil and become a Hexenmeister, but then what can you do now that you have this ability? I'm curious.
Oh, we can do a lot of things. We can help mankind in many ways. I'm going to give you a couple lessons on what a Hexenmeister is trained to do, coming right out of the powwow books. Lesson 1, you can treat digestive diseases in children. My grandma did this. She was not a general all-purpose Hexenmeister or powwow doctor, but she did have a number of cures for hiccups, diarrhea, vomiting, upset stomachs, the kind of conditions that kids have. I'm going to teach you one of these because it's a lot better than taking Pepto-Bismol. You take the baby that's got the upset stomach. The Pennsylvania Dutch word for this is the opnema. Opnema from opnema, meaning to take away, meaning the kid's health has been currently taken away. You go outside and you find a blackberry bush, and preferably one for which the end has grown back into the ground. And you sit at that blackberry bush and you pass the baby under the blackberry bush to its mother and its mother back to you, doing that 3 times. If you haven't got a blackberry bush, you can do this in the house using one of the legs of the kitchen table. There's another technique that the powwow doctor, the Hexenmeister, can use to get rid of the baby's digestive condition. Have the baby kiss Lincoln's head on a Lincoln penny. Good old Lincoln sucks the illness out of the child, and then with your finger, you flip the penny out of the middle of the road, and there goes the opnema.
So, Ned, with something like this, it always interests me. Because is there something factual that could make this work? Is there an explanation of how passing a baby under a blackberry bush or under chair legs in a kitchen might have somehow helped them? Like, is there?
Yeah, George, I think there is. You know, just as you would take a child that has the colic and maybe put it over your shoulder and pat it or burp it, this agitation of the child by the mechanical act of passing it under a blackberry bush or under a chair is likely to help clear their gas. Okay?
You think they would pick like a less dangerous bush?
Yeah.
Like,
but you got to use the ones that work, George.
That's oh, you're right. Okay, go ahead.
Trial and error has proven these. We have a problem with witches out here. As I said, they do come and go. The bad ones have knocked over my wood pile. They dried up Linda's milking goats when she had a goat herd. They caused trees to fall across the road. They snapped the power lines. The bad witches can be a problem, but we know how to get rid of witches. There are many techniques. One is a bunch of magic words called the Sator Palindrome, which we have written on our barn. The other technique that's common is to trick a witch into walking over above a certain kind of broom called a bison broom. I'm going to tell you about the composition of the broom that gives it its magic powers, but you have to place it somewhere that a witch will walk above it. So here I'm placing it above a lower door in our barn because there is a door above that through which a witch might conceivably enter our barn. And no witch can cross a bison broom and stay alive. If she crosses the broom, and the broom is properly made of a hawthorn stalk, a woodbine twine to hold it together, and birch and straw wipings or bristles, if she's dumb enough to walk across it, she drops dead. It's a surefire termination of witches.
So witches are, I'm sorry, not witches. Brooms are always, I always see brooms with witches. Do you know any other ways in which you can hurt a witch with a broom? I mean, this seems interesting.
Yes, sometimes it's your wife who's the witch, and you may guess that your wife is a witch because she leaves you in the middle of the night, flies off on a broom. If you want to hurt a witch and not really kill her, get to her broom when she's not around, spread the birch and straw wipings at the bottom, and stick your male member through it. Now urinate through the broom, not on the broom because she'll smell and sense that. But you can gain power over a witch by sticking your male member through the broom and urinating. Now, next time she takes off, she'll only get about 20 feet and she'll crash headfirst into the forest or into the ground. That teaches her a lesson, and you can at least break her of the habit of flying out at night. Third lesson I'd like to give you is how to retrieve stolen goods. Witches and other people too, there are plenty of thieves out here who steal. How do you bring back stolen goods? Well, one of the lessons that a Hexenmeister learns is to reverse thievery. The name in Pennsylvania Dutch is halprod. Halprod means the front running wheel. It's the front right wheel on a buggy. Now you need a buggy to do this, but the halprod or the guiding wheel has to be jacked up off the ground with a piece of wood so that it freely spins. You then take a piece of paper on which you have written what you think has been stolen from you on the piece of paper and tie it under the wheel. Now slowly turn the wheel in the reverse direction while reciting, turn back, the goods of your heist. I command you, thief, in the name of Christ. And what will happen, guaranteed, is the thief that stole the object will bring it back walking backwards. And the thief has returned my favorite box of cigars.
Okay, that's interesting. But what can Hexenmeisters do about pandemics? I mean, this is...
Yes,
yeah.
That's the subject of the art. I just tried to give you a couple examples here of what Hexenmeisters can do in general. But now let's take a look at what you can do about pandemics. The most common cure is the one we're here to celebrate today. It's called the Dutchman's Cure for the Contagion. You need a good bottle of bourbon. And as George just said, Tomboy Bourbon by Social Still fits this a T. Handcrafted from Pennsylvania corn and rye and barley. In the olden times, the Dutchmen used local whiskey. It was considered more reliable than the more expensive national brands that were shipped in. But what you need to do is to alternate a jigger of whiskey with a slice of onion. Now, raw onion is a little hard to take. We'll show you how to solve that problem. But this is the cure you find in most of the old Pennsylvania German healing books.
Wait, are you going to do this now? Are you going to?
I will do it in a few minutes.
I'm sorry. No, I want to get ready. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I want to show you some of the other cures that have been published because I think you will see by comparison that the Pennsylvania German's cure is the most reliable. This is what's called an English gentlewoman's cure, sometimes also called polypharmacy, because the recipe contains a god-awful mixture of dozens of components. This is called Dr. Burgle's antidote. I think you may all know that our executive director of the Siegel Museum and the NCHGS is Carrie Burgle, spelled slightly different. But Carrie tells me that this is her 5 times great grandmother's cure. And it's typical of the non-simple cures. It's got everything in it. It's got a pulverized set of roots, of cinnamon, of bark, of Virginia snake root, ginger, black pepper, nutmeg, all of this boiled in 3 pints of muscadine wine. Now, don't boil the wine too much or you lose all the alcohol. But this is considered a cure. It first appeared in a British publication in 1739, and it lasted for many years afterwards. It's a difficult to formulate product. It's got, as I mentioned, everything in it but the kitchen sink. One of the things that it's got in it is mithridate. We'll talk about mithridate shortly because mithridate is itself a mixture of at least 50 components. To make all this stuff palatable, you add a molasses or a partially refined sugar and beat that in well. A spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. One of the more interesting other blends is one called the Four Thieves therapy. The Four Thieves therapy goes back to the 15th century in France. Four thieves were caught stealing from the bodies of recently deceased plague victims. They would enter a house where someone was dying of the plague, come back when the person had died. Everybody else was afraid to be there, and they'd strip it of all valuable goods. And they didn't seem to get the plague. Well, they were captured and taken to trial, and they were sentenced to be hanged for robbing from the dead, when the thieves suggested they would give humanity their cures in return for their freedom. And you can still buy Four Thieves oil today. You can Google it. There are several manufacturers. It also comes in a diluted form as a spray that you can spray on areas where the plague might have been. It's an interesting blend of cloves, lemon, cinnamon, eucalyptus, and rosemary. And it's carried in turpentine or olive oil, and it can be used orally. It can be rubbed on, can be used around the skin and nose, and it too is a cure and a prophylactic against the plague. Now, I mentioned mithridate. Another name for mithridate is theriac. This goes back to the 1st century Greek culture. The preparation theriac is named for a king named Therius V. Talk about components. 64 components pulverized together and allowed to age. Give you just a few of them. The flesh of poisonous snakes. How about pulverized mummy parts? Pig bile, animal feces, plenty of opium, plenty of red wine, and a lot of honey. And this is a universal cure, supposedly good for over 100 individual diseases. In Dr. Burgle's preparation, a tiny patch of mithridate is used in that formulation. Why so little? Because this is one of the most expensive drugs of all time. This makes medical pricing of on-patent drugs in the present time seem paltry by comparison. Very expensive product. You can make your own theriac. You need a sacred bottle or sacred vessel in which to age it. It's a little hard to get powdered mummy, but I think maybe you can find that on the internet. Fox bile, cinnamon, pig blood. It'll take you days to make this because you need over 50 components. So you blend up a few at a time. Use your own Tomboy bourbon to help you relax as you move through this theriac preparation. But eventually you have your own theriac component. Now, you've seen a number of different cures. What cure do you think you would prefer most? Well, I hope you, as a resident of the Pennsylvania German county of Northampton, would realize that the preferred cure is the Dutchman's cure. The onion, social still bourbon, and alternate them. Now it's time to try the cure. I'm going to show you on my PowerPoint how to put it all together, and George may show you how to drink it. The secret to how to make the preparation is contained in a number of books about the plague. I want to introduce you to one that has a particular connection to Northampton County. The German book about treating plagues is this particular one. The title in German, Kurzenbericht von der Pest, means a short report on the plague. The line below the title tells you what's in this book. Moralia, Gemeine Hausmittel, and Politische. That says, in translation, to fight the overbearing plague, read moral essays, frequently that was the book of Job, use your home remedies, and rely on your government. Oh my goodness. Back then, 1630, rely on your government. I wonder if we've ever learned anything since that time. So, that book was printed in 1630 in Stuttgart. It gets reprinted in Chestnut Hill, a Philadelphia suburb, in 1793. Slightly different title and a slightly shorter cover page, Kurzenbericht von der Pest. But it still has, as it says in the title, home remedies, recipes, can't read that one, and political reliance. But this particular one wasn't written and republished for the bubonic plague. It was written for the yellow fever epidemic that George had mentioned earlier as sweeping eastern Pennsylvania. We had several swipes across our area in the 16th and 17th and even early 18th centuries. The one in 1793 killed Mammy Morgan's husband, the famous Williams Township philanthropist. The particular book you see here was owned by the very Dr. Saylor whom I'm channeling tonight, Dr. Peter Saylor in Robsville. It's still in the hands of his descendants, a family named Wagner. But it has, as a supplement to the original Stuttgart edition, 10 pages of improvements. And I'm not sure they're improvements because they recommend frequent bleeding, consumption of excessive mercury oxide and mercury chloride, and frequent enemas. And this advice was brought to you by Dr. Benjamin Rush, one of Pennsylvania's preeminent colonial era physicians, a founder of the University of Pennsylvania Medical School, where they still teach such things as enemas, mercury powder, and bleeding. This book was used by our local powwow doctor. Now, what's in the book? In red on your screen are 4 of the recommendations that I think have merit even in the present climate. The one is to self-quarantine. Get yourself somewhere and stay away from other people. Don't let evil come in your door. Wear a mask. We'll talk about that shortly. Burn fresh juniper boughs, and we'll show you how to prepare that. And lastly, get yourself a good social still bourbon and drink a lot of it. Other techniques that were used for the bubonic plague were to cauterize the inflamed lymph nodes, read the book of Job repeatedly, bleed, and take calomel. The top 4 of these, I think, have some merit. Samuel Pepys was one of the many people who pointed out the merits of quarantining, the merits of staying away from others that have the plague. This comes from Samuel Pepys's diary written during the Great Plague, the bubonic plague of London in 1665. And it points out what people knew then and what the wise people know now. Getting too close to someone with the plague or a pandemic of any kind can bring it to you. And this is what the public houses looked like in London in Samuel Pepys's day. There was no mask wearing. There was no social distancing. There was the consumption of plenty of alcohol and plenty of food. But as you can see, the cup is being passed around. There's sneezing, kissing, social mingling. No wonder Pepys was afraid to go to his local pub. He knew he'd catch the pox. Talk about masks. The version of the N95 mask that was invented for the bubonic plague is the same picture that you see on the bottle of Tomboy Social Still Bourbon. It's the mask that was invented by physicians during the bubonic plague era. Looks like a beak of a bird, and the reason for that is out there in the proboscis, in the protruding part, there was a hinged bottom, and you stuffed it full of stuff that smelled good. Rosemary, spices, coriander, cinnamon, all kinds of things got stuffed up in there in the hopes that as you breathed in, you'd breathe that stuff and the vapors from the plague wouldn't bother you. Now, other advice from Petrus Gabriel's Kurzberichte von der Pest. How to prevent the spread of the vectors that bring the plague. The recommendation is to cut fresh junipers. Now, we happen to have a juniper tree. Cutting it when the berries are ripe is ideal. Cut a handful of the green bough portion of the juniper. Don't dry it. Bring it back to your house, and using barbecue grills, tubs, or anything you can find, ignite the juniper bush from below, and clouds of smoke will come out. It will smoke for hours if it's green juniper. And if you create these smoke turbines at each of your doors and each of your windows, the evil spirits, the mosquitoes, the rats with the fleas, whatever is carrying the plague of that era won't enter the house. It's best to have your powwow doctor do this while wearing the magic amulet, the so-called Hexenfuß, and you too can block the entry of the plague into your premises. Now, another way to help yourself out in public, of course you're going to wear your mask, and of course you're going to try to keep a social distance, but there is a repellent that can be used. The repellent is the pulverized sap of a fern that grows in the Levant area, in Palestine, Iran, Iraq. It's called asafoetida. Asafoetida was widely imported into the colonies in massive quantities by the Pennsylvania Germans for its use in a repellent amulet. It has very few other uses, although sometimes it is used in cooking to add a distinctive odor. The Pennsylvania Dutch recommend it in all of the powwow books. It's recommended that it be placed into an amulet, which can either be a piece of cloth with some of it inside folded in, frequently stuffed into a red bag and worn around your neck. I give you the German translation of Asafoetida, Teufelsdreck. That means devil's crap. And it really does smell like devil's crap. Wearing this around your neck, you won't have to worry about social distancing. Nobody's going to come close to you. Now, this is what we're here about. The true Pennsylvania Dutch ritual for curing the plague or protecting yourself from it. George, get your bottle ready. Slice yourself some nice slices of onion. Put them on a grill. The reason for that is you need to soften them up, but if they're too hard and crunchy, they'll all fall apart. Grill them for a few minutes. Take your jigger of social still and start the ritual. A bite of the onion, a jigger of whiskey. And a bite of the onion, a jigger of whiskey, a bite of the onion, a jigger of whiskey. Continue this until all pandemic problems are solved for you as an individual. Nothing will bother you the rest of the night. And I give you the proven remedy of the Pennsylvania Dutch.
So, are you telling me that the best thing that we can do is to drink social still whiskey and like a shot of social still and then a bite of an onion, cooked or not cooked, and then more shots of social still whiskey?
I guarantee it. I have not had COVID-19, bubonic plague, polio, or any of these pandemics that have passed us in the past.
I'm sold.
Okay, I hope so.
All right, go on.
Now, it's time to get serious about this. There is an expression in Pennsylvania Dutch, der Poken lost sich nichts schlupen. This means don't trifle with the plague. Take it seriously. That's a problem that was had in the old days. You saw the people cavorting in the London pub in Samuel Pepys's time, not worrying about disease or transmission. You see it on the television today. We don't seem to take our plagues seriously. The plague can be mumps, tuberculosis, the pox, the flu, measles, or Schwinzug, that's consumption. Take the plague seriously. Now, it's time to wrap up. I have introduced you to Hexerei and to what it means to be a Hexenmeister. I might tell you that there are ways to reverse being a Hexenmeister, and I'm about to do them. You can read the 6th and 7th book of Moses backwards. You can take off your garments and pray to the Lord. And there are other techniques of backing out of it. But for the time being, you are a member of my coven. We have gathered today and we have learned something about Pennsylvania German folk medicine. We have not used any curses. We have used only curative techniques. But I want to introduce you to one curse and show you that as a group, if we repeat these words together, we can defeat an objective. Our objective could be to wipe out COVID-19. It could be that to stress that Black lives matter and that the injustice in our social system needs to be addressed. Or it can be another special cause. The curse is very simple. I'm not going to translate this for you. I'm going to send you to your Google translator and have you look it up. But du Herrenson, du Herrenson, du Herrenson, verdammt soll's du sein. Du Herrenson, du Herrenson, du Herrenson.
Verdammt soll's du sein.
Ah, it's working. It's working. I can feel the COVID-19 vanishing. But I have one particular objective that I'd like you to join in before we go to our general question period. Let's attack this objective, the Penn East Pipeline. The Penn East Pipeline is planned to cross the sacred ridge of Hexenkopf, not far from the Witch's Head herself. The witches have decided they are going to invoke their powers, but our coven today can help. So while thinking of the objective of the termination and non-construction of a pipeline, du Herrenson, du Herrenson, du Herrenson, verdammt soll's du sein. Okay, now it's time to ask you for questions for the evening and for me to gently back out of being a Hexenmeister. George,
all right, Ned, yep, I'm here. Can you hear me, Ned?
Yes, I can.
Sure. So if you want, you can bring up the your browser back up. I do have a couple questions for you.
Okay.
I have something we talked about earlier that you sent to me, but I did have one from a viewer who asked, "Are there any PA Dutch cures for poison ivy?"
Oh yes, plenty of them. Jewelweed is a cure. A pulverized mineral base made of iron oxide and zinc oxide dries it up. And frankly, the same technique that was used on baby rashes, the spores of a fern. There are many herbal techniques for poison ivy, and those are just a few.
And I'm Pennsylvania Dutch. It's part of my heritage. And I'm sad to say that I'm not really as familiar with this as I feel like I should be. Can you explain to me a little bit? Like you have the amulet. We know I know about hex signs. I have some in my own home. Like where did like some of these symbols come from, or what do they mean to you? I'm just more curious about like the symbolism of some of these things.
That's a very good question. First of all, this particular symbol of the star within the circle in Pennsylvania Dutch lore is called the Hexenfuß, the witch's footprint. And the mystique goes like this. It is said that the witch's hoof is star-shaped. If one witch sees a witch's footprint anywhere, she'll know that one of her sisters has been there and she won't come. So although the witch's footprint in my amulet is sometimes thought to be a source of evil, it's actually a preventative from having a witch bother me. Other kinds of magical incantations are the so-called Sator palindrome. I'm going to encourage you to Google that. S-A-T-O-R. Just Google Sator and you'll find all about it. It's a magic array of 5 words. Sator repe tenant opera rotas. And this is an expulsion of witches, and it's a protection against witches visiting you.
So, Ned, I'm also curious, when we know about Pennsylvania Dutch history, and a lot of it's still prevalent, but when did the change happen between going to a Hexenmeister or using that a powwow doctor to going to an actual physician? Was it in the 1950s? Was this something that Pennsylvania Dutch people are still doing today?
Yes. Well, first of all, Pennsylvania Dutch people are still doing it today, but there's very limited access to Brauschers, powwow doctors, and Hexenmeisters. There are a few practicing Hexenmeisters. One chap writes books about it, claims that he has the power. The shift is important because it corresponds with an event in modern history. In the 19th century, in fact, 17th, 18th, and 19th century, the history of medicine calls this the heroic period. Not that the physicians were heroes, but to anybody who survived their therapy was a hero. This is when you bled. This is when you gave enemas. This is when you induced vomiting. one particularly nasty thing was something called a pressurized clister, which was a bag of warm salt water that they stuck up your butt and squeezed. So all of this stuff was designed to expel the body's fluids, the bleeding, the purging, the puking. And people actually died by going to orthodox physicians. It was dangerous.
I'm surprised that anybody went to any of them after they heard the reviews from their friends who just came from one.
Yes, well,
what happened there?
A survey in the Pennsylvania Dutch countryside that was conducted in the 1870s showed only about a third of Pennsylvania Dutch folks went to an MD. The rest of them went to a Brauscher, a powwow doctor, or relied on home medicine. You were more likely to be killed than cured. But about 1904, as a result of a study that President McKinley started, obviously before he died, and was continued by Andrew Carnegie, a study was done of American establishment medicine and by a group of outsiders. And the conclusion was, this stuff is pretty deadly. They got to stop this crap. And the Flexner Report, which is what it was called, was the beginning of the revolution that brought us modern medicine. And the clause that above all do no harm derives from the Flexner Report. So from 1910 on, passage of the Food and Drug Act in 1907, we start to see people believing and trusting their MDs.
And yeah, this really can. One other question I have here is with the whole Hexenmeister lifestyle. Like, is that something that you can ever leave? I mean, once you become a Hexenmeister, is that it? Like you're in it? Is there a way out of it? I mean, not that I'm saying that anyone would want to leave. I'm sure it's a lot of fun. But if you wanted to.
Let me tell you the most foolproof way to leave. It is to take the powwow books that you have been using, especially the 6th and 7th book of Moses, because that's the most evil, and tie them into a pillowcase or a cloth bag and throw them into the Delaware River. If you get rid of your powwow books, you can reverse the spell. But one particular one, the 6th and 7th book of Moses, if you patiently read it in reverse, you can back out of the Hexenmeister status. And a prayerful plea to God can also reverse it. So it's reversible.
I have a serious question. What do you think of Ouija boards? Is that silly? Is that something that's, I don't know. I mean, this is out of left field. I'm just curious because a lot of this type of stuff, like, is really interesting. The things that you're mentioning. Are Ouija boards like a silly thing? You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, I do. You know,
Okay.
most of the cures that I talked about today, except those that were herbal, those that involved the saying of phrases, the passing of the baby under, these have a strong psychosomatic component. You must really believe that it's going to help you and cure the condition. There's a very common phrase in Pennsylvania Dutch, hele, hele, hinkeldrek, bis morgen frei, get alles weg. Ha ha, chicken poop. By tomorrow morning, you'll feel better. All this stresses that belief in the cure is a powerful step toward having the cure. The Ouija board is a little like that. If you know an outcome subconsciously that you want to happen, as your fingers move the platen around on the table, you'll find that it's spelling out what you really subconsciously want it to spell. So I think there's a hint of positive activity to a Ouija board, George.
And is that part of like what tradition is? You know, tradition is celebrating these things that connect us to our ancestors and family. And while we know that maybe some of them might be silly, like you just said, there is an effect that believing in something can actually have on a person.
Yes. The belief is the greatest power of all. It certainly seems to help in diseases, and there's plenty of cases of strong belief and, of course, blended with modern medicine, helping you get through the most difficult of medical challenges.
Sure. So, Ned, we have gone over by 50 or by 21 minutes, which is fantastic because I think we have viewers still watching. So it doesn't matter. I think it was great. This is one of the most fun times I have had in the last few months. I really have to admit, I'm really curious to kind of go back into this presentation and watch it again. It's interesting. Is there any? Well, yeah. Oh, yeah. I see your social still, and I raise you my empty one, which is sad. I need to go back. Whatever's left in there, take it.
I've got an inch left in mine.
Do you have any onions?
Alas, no onions right now. I'll get those later.
I'll give it up. So, Ned, let's cheers. Go ahead.
Cheers.
Cheers. And to finish this up, I want to say thank you, of course, Ned Handel, a retired professor in medicinal chemistry from Lehigh University. Is there any way that you want to tell people to find out more about you, or I don't know, or to learn more about Pennsylvania Dutch history?
Well, just Google me; you'll find plenty out. But also Google Hexenkopf. There's a book about Hexenkopf which you can buy at the gift shop at the Siegel Museum, which will tell you a lot of these various cures and their association with the witch's headquarters rock.
Excellent.
So that's my story for the day.
Ned, thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe.
Everybody, we talked about social still over and over. We talked. We want to make sure that everybody goes to lvhistory.org to learn more about Lehigh Valley Passport to History. Be sure to check out the upcoming Passport to History weekend on Saturday, August 15th and Sunday, August 16th. And social still. I have to refill this. I saved this for quarantine. I'm out. I have to go back in. Thank you. And Ned, this was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, George.
Okay. And good night. Thank you, everybody.